Alright, so now we're on chapter 5, and we got this beautiful image of Griffith here with his sword. So we got Guts leaning on Griffith here as they're staring on Nosferatu Zod, and Zod is like, fight! Fight me until you're torn to pieces! Now Pip and Judo and Rickert are all just scared out of their mind, and Casca is like, Griffith! And then Zod roars as he knocks down one of the pillars, and Griffith screams at Guts, can't you move? And Guts is like, we're dead if I don't! And then Griffith tells Guts, you from the left, let's go! Now as Zod is going in, the two decide to separate. And with this diversion, Griffith is able to slice off Zod's left arm. And the others are like, oh yeah, awesome, it looks like we got him. Now Griffith is telling Guts to run for it, but unfortunately, Zod is coming right back in. Casca tries to warn him ahead of time, but unfortunately, Zod's tail whips Griffith back. And Griffith goes crashing right into one of the pillars. And it's so jarring that even Casca grabs her mouth with both of her hands. But luckily, by being knocked back, his Beylik comes out of his armor. Guts is then trying to stand up with the assistance of his sword as Zod is bearing down on him. And then Zod is like, what a day today's been, that I'd meet a human, two humans, who could wound me so. Zod then picks up his severed arm and starts to whack Guts with it. He then uses some sort of ability that allows him to reattach his own arm. And he's like, and that both of them would be lost at once. I'll start with this man. Now, Casca is absolutely losing it right now, but as Zod goes to look down, he's like, what? What's this? It's the egg of the king. And he's in disbelief right now. He's like, it can't be the egg of the king, a cub like him with the crimson Beylik, the god hand. And you see the veins in his eyes and the absolute fear, and he's absolutely losing it, which is amazing because Zod was giving everyone else so much fear, and the fact that he's staring at this Beylik and he's got so much fear is really shocking. And then he's like, so it's that kind of ploy, and he starts to laugh in a deranged manner. And then he punches a hole through the ceiling and says, our battle is on hold for now, boy, but I wonder if I'll ever meet up with you again. Here's a word of warning. No, a prophecy. If you could be said to be a true friend of this man, then take heed. When his ambitions collapses, death will pay you a visit, a death you can never escape. And then he smashes through the ceiling as everyone is covering their eyes. And then the men outside the castle are like, what's that? A demon? And then we see Zod flying off in the distance as lightning is coming down from the sky. And Guts is only left to ponder, death? You mean I'm going to die? And then Casca runs over to Griffith and she grabs onto his body. Gaston and the other Hawks Raiders grab on the Guts and are like, are you okay, Captain? And Guts goes to check in on Griffith, but Casca swipes him away. Don't you touch Griffith. It's your fault. This never would have happened to Griffith if it weren't for you. Alright, so for chapter 6, we got a couple things to talk about. First, when this came out in Young Animal, it came out on December 25th of 1992, and the Young Animal cover for that issue looked like this with Guts' face. They also got a picture of Guts without all the text on it, and it's really badass looking, but it's kind of weird at the same time because very rarely do you ever see Guts laughing like this. Like, it's just not a normal facial expression for him. And then to start the issue itself, we got Nosferatu Zod saying, death will pay you a visit, a death you can never escape. Now, there is a colored version of this as well, and we got the colored version of how it appeared in the original magazine, and then we got a clean version as well. And then we got a repeat of the last phrase, a death you can never escape, and this time the perspective is on Guts, and again we got another nice colored page right here of how it showed up in the magazine, and how it showed up, just being a clean version. Now, this is not part of the issue itself, however, it did come out in late 1992, and it's a Young Animal telephone card with Guts' picture on it. So this is really badass. Unfortunately, this was the best resolution I could get for this photo. I couldn't find any other more detailed versions, but this is really nice, guys. I mean, this is just absolutely amazing. I love when I can find photos of Guts or any Berserk merchandise from way back, especially stuff I haven't seen before. Alright, so now we're at Windham Castle, the royal capital of Midland, and we got a couple of aristocrats talking about the Band of the Hawk. And they're talking about the fact that Griffith's men had grave injuries in their recent battle. And the rumors is that some giant beast appeared in a Tudor stronghold. But they're all like, this is a falsehood. However, it seems that not just one or two people witnessed it, it was multiple people. But because of the fact that they still took the stronghold, it can't be a mere blunder on Griffith's part. He had to have some strategy involved in that. And then they're becoming vexed that Griffith is rising the ranks, and then we see Guts walking by. And then one of the aristocrats is like, clear the way, you churl. And I actually had to look this up because I wasn't even aware of that slur before, but a churl is basically an impolite or mean-spirited person. Or even a peasant. So basically they're calling Guts a peasant. And then the one aristocrat is making fun of Guts, saying, "Oh, did you get those wounds from that beast?" But Guts is not having any of it. He takes his crutch and puts it right on the aristocrat's foot. And the aristocrat doesn't want to just take this lying down, so he's like, "Face my sword!" But Guts just gives him a menacing glare, and that's all it takes for him to back off. And not just back off, he falls to his knees, and he's like literally on the verge of tears here. We then see Guts with the Band of the Hawk once again. And although they all seem pretty happy to see him, Casca's got a menacing glare on her face. And he's thinking about the fact that she was blaming him for the fact that Griffith got hurt in that last battle. Judo tries to reassure him though. He's like, "Everyone knows that it wasn't your fault. Don't sweat it." Now it turns out that they're all here to pay Griffith a visit. However, the various nobles and aristocrats are paying him a visit first. Now, even though most of them find him an annoying upstart, if they stake a claim in him early enough, it may pay off dividends in the future, especially given the fact that he's heading up the most mightiest army in all of Midland. Now, Guts wants to make his way to Griffith, however, Casca's yelling at him. And in a classic guy response, Guts is like, "I was listening, so what?" And speaking as a married man, the "so what" phrase never works out too well. And of course, Casca's like, "What do you mean, so what? I'm saying you need to wait here until the dignitaries have finished their audience." Now, Guts wants to make his way in, but the various soldiers block his path. Guts then easily steals one of the weapons from the guards and knocks him over. And with another swift move, he steals the other's weapon and knocks him over too. And after doing so, he's like, "Wanna come, Rickert?" And just as Guts is going in, he's like, "Yo, Griff!" But unfortunately, he feels something on his shoulder. He turns around and he sees Casca rearing up for a punch, and she punches him right in the face. And I always love this face by Guts here, you know, like kind of that cartoonish face when you just get slugged by someone. Kind of reminds me of the old Bugs Bunny cartoons when like they would get hit with a hammer or something. And I absolutely love the face by Corcus here. It looks like he's watching like an AEW or WWE event. He's like, "Oh!" Now, Guts calls Casca a crazy bitch, but she's got tears in her eyes and she looks very sad right now, so Guts decides it's probably not best right now to fight with her. And she's like, "Why does Griffith gotta bother with a guy like you?" So, realizing he's not gonna get much further with Casca being there, he's like, "I'll just get going for now." Now, the others note that it feels like Griffith has been drifting away from them lately. We then see Guts swinging his sword on a staircase. And while he's swinging his sword, he's thinking about all the times that Casca has been yelling at him. The fact that she called him a mad dog, and why does it always have to be this way, and the fact that it was his fault that he got hurt in that battle with Nosferatu Zod. And just as he's thinking about all this, he's interrupted by Griffith, who's using a crutch to walk. And Griffith admires the fact that Guts is able to swing his sword so soon after the battle with Zod. Now, Griffith mentions that he's kind of getting annoyed by all the officials who are just going in to see him to gain favor with him, but he realizes that he has to play the game if he wants to ascend to the kingdom. They start talking about Nosferatu Zod, and they're like, this might be proof that something huge, something beyond human understanding, exists within this world. For instance, what are called gods? And Guts is like, don't you mean devils? And in a very cryptic response, Griffith is like, who knows? Aren't they the same thing? Now, Guts tells Griffith that the reason that Zod flew off is that he saw the bayonet hanging around Griffith's neck. And as Griffith pulls out his bayonet from his shirt, Guts thinks about what Nosferatu Zod said in the last chapter. Now, Guts is wondering why Griffith would put his life on the line for a single soldier, even though it's a very important soldier in Guts. And Griffith's like, there's no reason. At all. Do I need one? Tell me, do I need a reason each time I put myself in harm's way? For your sake? Alright, we got another beautiful cover here for volume 6. And then we see a picture of Guts and Casca inside a tree, and it looks like Casca's completely naked here, so this is making us wonder what the heck is going on, especially with Casca yelling at Guts in the last couple chapters. Now, Griffith looks over at Guts after he asks the question, and Guts is like, well, no, I guess you don't really need a reason. However, they're then interrupted by the king. And not just the king, his brother Julius and a couple of castle guards. Now, Griffith immediately bows down to the king, but Guts is still standing up with his sword in his hand. But Julius is very quick to excoriate him for not bowing in the king's presence. The king then says he's out for a stroll and that they don't have to bow their heads. Now, the king officially announces that this is his younger brother Julius, and that he's the general of the White Dragons and second in succession to the throne of Midland. Now, it's really interesting because we find out Julius's name, but the king of Midland is never given a name throughout the manga. He's just the king of Midland, which is kind of interesting. Now, the king marvels at Griffith's beautiful battle plans, and he's like, just seeing you guys fight in the battlefield, it even makes my blood seem to boil at this point. Now, it turns out that a lot of the statesmen are not favorable of the common man, but given such the circumstances, they need as many people as they can get to win these battles. And given all the complimentary words, Griffith is very thankful. Now, peeking out from the corner, we see a girl. And Griffith is like, who might that be? And it turns out that the lady is Charlotte, and it's the king's daughter. Now, as the king and Julius are taking their leave, Charlotte goes to follow them. Unfortunately, she trips on one of the cobblestones and begins to trip. Griffith puts out his arm and is able to catch her, however. Julius then takes the mere touching of the princess as an insult and slaps Griffith across the face. Now, Guts looks like he's ready to do something about it. He's like, hey pal, but Griffith puts his crutch against him and slows him down a bit. He's like, please pardon my rudeness, your lordship General Julius. Now, Charlotte's ready to go back to her father, but she gives Griffith a glance that makes it look like she might be falling in love with him. Now, we see various women in the kingdom talking about the fact that Lord Griffith could be made a count. And they're even talking about the fact that he's beautiful and elegant and dignified. He's a lot better than a lot of the officers in the castle who are so boorish and rude. Now, Julius quickly breaks this up and he's like, chirping sparrows. Now, a short bald man, Minister Foss, then interrupts Julius. And he's here to tell Julius that for the upcoming autumn hunt, that the Band of the Hawk will be the king's guard. Which frustrates Julius because usually it's supposed to be the White Dragon Knights. And now he's absolutely seething right now. He's like, oh man, it seems like the glory of the White Dragon Knights has faded in respect to the Band of the Hawk's achievements. And Foss reminds him, because of the Band of the Hawk's ever-victorious streak, that he's surely a godsend on the kingdom, and he's gained a special place in the king's heart because of all the victories he's accomplished. And if he continues doing all this, it won't be long before he reaches the rank of general. Now, Julius is absolutely enraged by this. He's like, I've never heard of a commoner become a general before. Foss decides to be a little devious right here, and he's like, well, you know, on an autumn hunt, things could get a little murky in that forest, and you never know if a stray arrow might fly wildly. A stray arrow well covered in poison. And although Julius is a little slow at first, he's like, oh, I see what you're getting at. A stray arrow, eh? Interesting. A fitting way for a commoner to die. And as Julius is leaving, we get this very sinister look on Foss's face. So you gotta wonder at this point, what kind of influence does Foss have in the kingdom? It's then later on at night, Guts is looking up at the moon with his sword in hand, and he's thinking about the conversation that he had with Griffith earlier. And although he doesn't really have an answer to what he wants to do with his life, for now, he's gonna swing his sword for Griffith's sake. Alright, so for chapter 8, we got a picture of Charlotte here, and, she's looking very cute. It's just a nice little picture. And then we see a picture of the fox being chased by the various dogs, and it looks like it's time for the autumn hunt. Now, we actually got this picture of the fox here from the Berserk trading card game in a colored version, so I thought that was pretty cool. And then we see the king and his various guards looking at the hunt going on. Now they're like, would your majesty care to join in on the hunt? But he's like, no, at my age, I would tire too soon. Now we see Julius looking over at Griffith and the Band of the Hawk. And then he takes a quick look at the assassin who's going to shoot the quote-unquote stray arrow at Griffith. Now I always think it's kind of funny here, because when the fox makes its way to Guts, he just kind of screams at it. He doesn't even try to catch it or anything. And you can tell he's just kind of annoyed by the whole proceedings. Now Julio's like, well, it's kind of part of the job to do this kind of stuff. Plus, we're not putting ourselves in harm's way, but Guts is like, it feels more natural for me to be swinging my sword around. So unless he's actually risking his life, everything else just kind of seems very mundane and boring to him. And Corcus begins to scold Guts. He's like, look, we're on the autumn hunt with the King's Guard. It's a privilege just for us to be chosen here. We have to run around battlefields covered in mud and blood, and we've earned this privilege, and you're complaining about it? It's ridiculous. Now, Casca just merely listens to the conversation, and then she takes a quick look over at Charlotte. Now, Charlotte doesn't like the sight of killing, so she turns her head away when someone shoots at the fox. And Griffith comes over to her, and he's like, do you dislike hunting? And she honestly admits that she doesn't like hunting because she thinks that it's cruel. And she's like, it's the same as the battlefield. Why do men enjoy shedding blood? And to kind of ease the tension, Griffith plucks off a leaf from one of the trees and starts to blow on it. Charlotte does likewise, and the two just kind of have a fun time together blowing leaves. Now, Casca sees the whole proceedings and gets a little bit jealous by this and starts to ride away. Now Julius tells the assassin that he shouldn't be too impatient, that the chance will come eventually. And then just as he says this, we see a wild boar run right in the middle of Griffith and Charlotte. And because of this, it spooks Charlotte's horse and he goes running off. Griffith, with no other choice, has to chase Charlotte down. And realizing that this is the opportunity, Julius looks over at the assassin and gives him the go-ahead. After chasing down Charlotte's horse, he's eventually able to slow it down. He then checks in on the shaking Charlotte as we see the assassin covered in the brush, looking to line up his shot. Now, Charlotte admits that she was very scared and that her heart is still pounding, and she's never been on such a wild horse ride in her life. Now, Griffith tries to reassure her by saying that her fears have already subsided, but just as he's saying this, we see the arrow coming in, and it lands directly in his chest. And just as this happens, we see the band of the Hawk coming in, and Guts is like, Griffith! Having just been shot by the arrow, Griffith then collapses right into the water. Casca goes by her side and she's like, Griffith, are you okay? Hang on! Now Guts, having no sense of decorum, goes up to the princess, grabs her shoulder and is like, what the hell is going on? Where'd that arrow come from? And she's in pain right now and she's like, I don't know! Don't touch me! Now Guts is looking off in the forest trying to see if he can find the person that shot Griffith, but unfortunately he doesn't see anyone. And the assassin notes that the arrow's been soaked in deadly poison, and it in fact comes from the calabal bean. Now I tried to look up the calabal bean on Wikipedia and Google, and nothing turned up. However, there is a calabar bean, and in Japanese sometimes they switch L's and R's, so it's probably just, a Japanese translational error there. But anyway, there's a place called Calabar, which is a location in Nigeria. And as it turns out, the old people of Old Calabar used to use this poison for people who were accused of witchcraft. And it was considered only to affect the guilty. If a person was accused of a crime and they ingested it, but they didn't die, they were considered innocent. So kind of an interesting little bit of historical information right there. We then see Griffith fully conscious and everyone's actually really surprised. And Griffith pulls out his own arrow and he looks at it and he's like, poison I'd say, a rather strong one. And it turns out that the arrow didn't actually hit Griffith, it hit the Bailet. A stroke of luck as it would seem. And everyone else in the Band of the Hawk is like, holy cow, it's the devil's luck. And Guts is thinking about the fact that, yeah, this is no ordinary luck. Now, Casca wants Griffith to take off his armor to make sure that he's okay, but he's like, nah, it's really nothing. Now, because the whole incident happened because Charlotte's horse was going erratic, she blames herself for the incident. Guts then tells Griffith that he's gonna go search the area with his men. He's like, come on, Gaston. But just then, Griffith looks in the clearing and he sees Julius staring him down. And he's like, a high price to pay for this poison. And just like that, we're back at Windham Castle, and we see a very angry Julius who's excoriating the man who should have killed Griffith. And not only did they not kill Griffith, Griffith protected the princess with his own body, so he gets some accolades for the whole incident. So his stock only went up because of this. And Julius remarks that it's the pinnacle of ineptitude. He then excuses the assassin and goes sits down on a chair. And he thinks about the fact that those eyes, like he was trying to daunt me, like he was looking down on some worthless thing. That was his expression. And he remarks that it's remarkably similar to a hawk's eyes. But he eventually tries to reassure himself that, no, it was nothing, like, my mind was just playing tricks with me there. We then see Guts go up to a high tower where he meets Griffith in a study. Now it turns out to be a great man. Griffith is reading many great books, including one about Kama Sutra, it would seem. Guts eventually sits down and he's like, well, you want me to do something? And Griffith's like, yes, I'd like you to kill a man for me. We then see Guts in a cloak at Julius's manor. And it turns out that Griffith wants him to kill Julius, second in line for the throne. And it turns out that Griffith was able to identify that the poison was from the calabal bean. And it turns out that only one person has bought it as of late, and he was the best bowman among the White Dragon Knights, which would mean that he's working for Julius. Now, he even paid one of the maids to investigate this man, and it turns out that they were discussing the disturbance of the assassination attempt. And it's for these reasons that he wants Guts to kill King Julius for him, as a means for revenge. We then see Guts lurking around the rooftops as Julius is training with his son Adonis. And Julius is not taking it easy on his son here, he's actually going rather rough. Now, Hassan is trying to tell Julius to calm down, but Julius is not having any of it. And he's like, Adonis must someday become the leader of the White Dragon Knights and command the mightiest force in the land. And therefore, he can't go easy on him. We then see the sword fly out of Adonis's hand as he goes flying back. Julius then calls it a day as Hassan goes to check in on Adonis. And as Guts was watching this whole thing, he kind of thinks about the fact that it's very similar to how Gambino treated him as a child. But he's like, can't be careless at a time like this, I gotta stay focused. Now, Hassan is trying to implore Julius to be a little easier on his son, and Julius agrees that his frustrations have gotten the best of him as of late. Now, as Hassan takes his leave, Julius thinks about Griffith and tosses his chalice into the fire. He then notices that the wind is coming through one of the doors, and then he sees a cloaked man within his residence, and it turns out to be Guts. He then reaches for a sword, but Guts is too quick and slashes him across the chest. And as he makes this motion, the cloak on his head comes off. Julius then desperately clutches on the Guts, and he's like, I know you. You're Griffiths. As he bleeds out and falls to the ground. Guts then notices a dark, shadowy figure by the door, and knowing that he can't leave any witnesses, he's gonna drive his sword right into this person. And after doing so, he quickly realizes that it was Julius's son, Adonis. And this just completely and utterly shocks him. Now Guts is staring at the reality of the situation, that he killed a small boy, Adonis. And it's very gruesome here. Blood is everywhere on the floor. Guts is actually very shaken to his core here. He looks like he has no idea what's going on. Like emotionally, he must just be going through all this turmoil inside right now. And as Adonis is slumping over, he reaches his hand out. He's looking for some form of embrace before he dies. And Guts grabs onto his hand as he's coughing up blood. And Adonis has got tears in his eyes. And it's just so heart-wrenching right now just watching this happening. Watching a child, die right before Guts' eyes. And you can really see that this is affecting Guts as well as he puts his hand over his mouth. But unfortunately, he doesn't have time to mourn his loss as the castle guards have already caught him. So with one swift move, Guts goes in and just lops them both off with his giant sword. He then puts on his hood as the castle guards are getting ready to confront the robber. Hassan then sees the reality of the situation and is just absolutely heartbroken by it. And he's like, "Find him! The robber! You will not let him leave this house alive!" We then see Guts slashing his way through, and eventually there's too many guards to fight head on, so he's got to jump off the castle walls. He then goes through some trees and realizes that he can escape through the sewer system. But unfortunately, as he bursts his way into the sewer system, he trips and hits the back of his head on like a wall or something. And because of this, he's put into a dreamscape in which he's thinking about battling Gambino when he was a little child. And he's thinking, the sound of swords clashing, that's Gambino! I was always desperate, always trying to get you to appreciate me. But as their battle is going on, he notices a shadow that's growing ever closer to him, and it turns out to be none other than Nosferatu Zod. And Zod readies his sword, and in one epic swing, takes out Gambino's head. And Guts is crying, he can't believe what's going on, so he's like, I gotta get revenge, I gotta get Zod! But unfortunately, Zod thrusts his sword right through Guts' chest, and Guts goes down onto the ground, blood is coming from his chest and his mouth, and then we see Zod looking at his own hand, and then as we get a close-up on his face, we see that it's none other than Guts himself, in the monstrous form of Zod. Now, I actually think that this might be rather symbolic, and I made a video about this in the past, talking about my theories on the topic. So take a look at that video if you're interested, but otherwise let's get back on track. Guts eventually wakes up and he finds out that he's still in the sewer system. He then realizes that he's coughing up blood as he makes his way through the sewer system. We then see the various members of the Band of the Hawk in a tavern of sorts. And it turns out that Griffith is not there because he's at the princess's dinner party. Guts then walks into the tavern and gets Casca's attention. And she's really surprised because Guts is all battered up and bleeding and looks really tired. And she's like, why do you look like that? Did you fall in a moat or something? And Guts doesn't even respond to this. He's like, where's Griffith? And once he finds out that Griffith's at a dinner party, he decides to go in that direction. But before he does so, Casca notices an arrow wound in his arm. We then see Guts walking up a staircase to the dinner party. It's a very lavish estate, and we see both Princess Charlotte and Griffith at the top of the staircase. Alright, so for chapter 12, the title of the chapter is Precious Things, and we got a nice picture of Guts here holding his sword. And we see that a ball is going on, we see various people dancing, they're having fun, there's music, and then we transition back over to Griffith and Charlotte, who are outside having a conversation with one another. Griffith then takes the cloak off of his back and puts it on the ground so Charlotte can sit down on it. And as Guts is looking up at Griffith and wants to go and talk to him, he's stopped by Casca. And she reminds him that he can't embarrass Griffith given the way that he's dressed and the fact that he's bleeding and everything. She then rips off a piece of cloth from her shirt and bandages up Guts, which is quite the improvement for her, blaming him for Griffith getting hurt to now actually helping him out. So this is actually quite the improvement. Now Charlotte admits that the reason that the ball is going on right now is to distract everyone from the long and tiresome war. And she's like, oh, it'd just be so much better if we could end the war itself. Now Griffith requotes Charlotte by saying, why is it that men enjoy little more than shedding blood? And he emphasizes the fact that it's merely a tool to secure and protect a precious thing. And I quote, but for a man to obtain a family or a sweetheart, he must obtain one other precious thing, for no other sake, to accomplish it for him himself. A dream. Dream? One who dreams of world domination, one who devotes his life to the thorough tempering of one's sword. If there's a dream which takes his whole life to find, there are also dreams which, like storms, devour tens of thousands of other dreams. With no relation to social status, class, background, whether it suits them or not, people yearn for a dream. Sustained by a dream, hurt by a dream, revived by a dream, killed by a dream. And even after being abandoned by a dream, it continues to smolder from the bottom of one's heart, probably until until the verge of death. And a man should envision such a lifetime once, a life spent as a martyr to the god named Dream. Ultimately, to be born and to then simply live for no better reason, I cannot abide such a lifestyle. Now, Charlotte admits that this is the first time that she's talked to a man like this before, and she marvels at the fact that he's such a wondrous person. And she even remarks that he's nobler than any of the nobles in the castle, which is quite the phrase coming from the princess's mouth. And she even likens him to a philosopher of sorts. And then she's like, well, I imagine your friends are attracted by that same charm that I see. And even though he admits that they're excellent troops and they faced many deaths together, they are not friends. A friend to Griffith is someone who would never depend upon another person's dream. Someone who wouldn't be compelled by anyone, but would determine and pursue his own reason to live. And therefore, what he thinks of as a friend is one who is his equal in every regard. And then we have this beautiful panel here of Guts down on the bottom of the staircase in the darkness, looking up at the majestic, godlike Griffith and his personification as this illusory dream. And upon hearing this, Guts looks a little bit dejected. And Griffith reminds the princess that he's like, there were days I didn't even have a slice of bread to eat, but now look at me, I'm talking to you, the princess of the whole kingdom. And then she questions, what is your dream? But before Griffith can say another word, they're interrupted by one of the maids, and she says that Uncle Julius has died. Now Charlotte is grieved by this news, but once we get a look over at Griffith, we notice that he's smiling in a very devilish manner. And of course, we already know that he had a hand in Julius's death. Now after hearing Griffith's magnificent speech and his aspirations, Guts decides to go down the staircase. Now for chapter 13, we got a couple of things to point out here. Number one, this came out in Young Animal issue number 9 in 1993, and we have this beautiful cover here of Guts with his sword on the cover. And then the first image says, the Midland Royal Family Crest, a castle bearing a crown seated in the midst of the heavens, the legendary Tower of Triumph. And it should be noted that there is a colored panel of this page as well, so that's really cool. And this panel of the Band of the Hawk as they're leaving the Midland Castle is also in color, so that's also another fantastic image. And then this next one is in color as well. And the ladies are saying, so many of them. They say this new campaign could mean an end to the war. Now only if that comes true. Don't worry, Midland has its own guardian angel, Speak of the devil. And then we see Griffith walking down the hallway. Now that's kind of an interesting choice of words there. Guardian angels and speak of the devil, and they're referring to Griffith. Now as Griffith is walking down the corridors, he runs into Foss. And he's like, the Band of the Hawk is the campaign's vanguard. And he even refers to the Band of the Hawk as the guardian deity. And Foss talks about the recent tragedy, and he's like, a child of only 13, Master Adonis, how cruel for him to die. And he refers to the event as the work of a demon, and Griffith's like, no, not the work of a demon, the work of a man. And then Foss tells Griffith that the arrow that was supposedly aimed at Princess Charlotte during the autumn hunt was actually for him. And it wasn't a Tudor spy that shot that arrow, it was in fact someone in the very court. And he even likens the people of the court to a den of evil spirits. So it's not very far-fetched for someone to have a murderous spirit within them. Which is rather interesting because Foss is sharing some very vital information to Griffith here. And we now know for certain that Foss is playing both sides. He's working for the Midland nobles, he's helping out their causes, he's recommending that they kill Griffith, but at the same time, he's also working the Griffith angle. He's also trying to quote-unquote help Griffith. He's essentially hedging his bets, so no matter which side wins, he'll be in that side's corner so that he's in a good position in the kingdom. Now, as Griffith takes his leave, Foss is actually rather interested that he didn't even bat an eye at Master Adonis's death. And he considers the idea that maybe it was all his doing in the beginning. And he also considers the possibility that he saw through King Julius's assassination and this was a form of retaliation. And if that's so, he may also know of Foss's involvement. With all that said, however, he figures that there's going to be a lot of people in the kingdom who are not big fans of Griffith, and he can eventually set them against Griffith in the future. However, as he's taking his leave, he catches a glimpse of Griffith off in the distance, and he's staring him down. And just the mere gaze of Griffith instills fear in Foss's heart. Now, as Casca is looking for Griffith, we see Prince Charlotte's getting his attention. She then gives him a necklace that's made of lodestone, which has a natural magnetic property to it, and it is said that the two that possess each half are destined to meet each other. other. He then states that when he returns from his campaign, he'll give it back to her, which pleases her greatly. He then bids her farewell and takes his leave with Casca. We then see for the first time the Queen of Midland, and she's taking umbrage to the fact that she's giving out gifts to someone of humble birth. And because of the condescending language, Charlotte eventually walks away. We then see Griffith telling his men to move out, as everyone in Midland is cheering them on. And what a beautiful panel this is with Griffith and the Band of the Hawk. Just absolutely gorgeous, guys. And then we see Guts with the Hawk's Raiders as he's thinking about the words that Griffith just said, about what a friend truly means, and the fact that you have to be equal with Griffith to be his friend. Alright, so we're on chapter 14, Engagement. Now we see a bunch of lightning in the background and a very menacing group of individuals. And it looks like the Band of the Hawk is about to face them down. Now we notice that Casca is starting to feel some irritation and pain right now, especially in her abdomen, but she's like, nah, let's do this. And with the lightning cracking, Griffith commands his forces to go forward. And it is a very brutal battle, guys. We see Pippin smashing people, we see Rickert shooting people, Judo's doing his part, and so is Guts. Now unfortunately for Casca, because of her abdominal pain, it's causing her movements to be rather labored and slowed. And then we see Adon, the leader, approach her. So you're her, the only woman who commands 1,000 of the Band of the Hawk. And then he decides to berate her a little bit. Women are inferior to men in strength. What use could they be in a battle? And then he assumes that she achieved her rank because of sneaking into Griffith's bedroom, which doesn't make Casca too happy. Unfortunately for her, Adon knocks her off her horse. The battlefield is a sacred ground of men. I, Adon, head of the Blue Whale Ultra Heavy Armored Fierce Assault Annihilation Night Corps, shall teach you the folly of your frivolity in setting foot upon it. And because she's not on a horse, she's at a severe disadvantage. Now the others want to help her out, but Casca tells them to keep back. She then realizes that she's at the edge of a cliff and at the end of her rope. Adon then looks to finish the job with one swing, but Guts intervenes to save her life. This ain't like you, says Guts. Guts then uses his next swing to knock Adon off balance. And with this, he tries to egg Adon on so that they can go into a battle. And now we're on chapter 15, Casca, and we got a really nice image here of Adon, Guts, and Casca. Now Adon starts to twirl his spear and says that this is the ultimate spear technique, which can crush even marble, passed secretly down through the Korbowitz family. He then goes in, but Guts slices his spear right in half with his sword. Guts then knocks Adon off his horse, and he looks rather pitiful. And in one swing, he slices off a part of his face. Now the Band of the Hawk is cheering on Guts, but Guts is like, hey, what's wrong with you, Casca? Your fighting's horrible today. And then we see Casca sweating, she looks like she's in a daze, and then she passes out. Guts goes to reach for her, and as he does, Adon shoots a crossbow right at Guts. And as Guts grabs onto Casca, he gets hit by the crossbow and off of his horse, sending the two down the cliffside. And then as they're falling down the cliff, the Band of the Hawk is shouting out for them, and they fall down into the water. But unfortunately for them, they gotta keep fighting the forces. Guts then pulls Casca out of the water and notices that she's unconscious. And with no other resort, he has to give her mouth to mouth to make sure that she's getting oxygen. He then pulls the arrow out of his side and realizes that they can't scale the cliff, so he's wondering what they should do next. He then notices that Casca's got a high fever and realizes that he has to get her to a dry area so she doesn't die of hypothermia. Griffith is then told that Guts and Casca fell off of a high cliff. Now Griffith wants to go help him, but one of the Midland Army soldiers is telling them that in war, conquering the enemy is the most important of all. And given the fact that the captain of the Hawk's Raiders and the female commander are together, would make one believe that they should be safe. However, Griffith still looks worried as lightning cracks behind him. Now Guts realizes that he can't start a fire because if he did, the enemy would see the smoke and that would give away their position. So with no other resort, he's got to take off Casca's clothing. And as he does so, he notices some blood. And it's not blood from a battle wound, it's blood from a period. Which makes Guts realize why she was so tired from the beginning. And to end the chapter, we see Casca cradled in Guts' lap as he's keeping her warm for the night. Alright, so now we're on chapter 16, Casca, chapter 2. Whether you come along or not is your decision. You know how to fight already, don't you? Says Griffith to Casca. We then notice Griffith and Casca riding together on horses at a much younger age in the bottom left corner, and we quickly realize that this is a dream. Guts then wakes up Casca in the cave. And as Casca starts to get up, she realizes her state of undress. What could I do? You were soaking wet and freezing to death to boot, says Guts. However, this justification doesn't go over too well for Guts, as Casca punches him in the face. She then proceeds to toss any heavy object at Guts in rage, including a knife. Hello? You finished now, you hysterical bitch? If you weren't a woman, I'd knock your jaw right out of joint for that. Casca then thinks about the words that were said to her by Adon in their previous battle. And this actually makes her quite angry. I wasn't born a woman because I wanted to be, cries Casca. Guts tries to apologize for his mistakes, but Casca tries to punch him. You really are some kind of bitch. Calm your ass down, don't make me force you. However, Casca can't fight on much longer because she's still on her period and very exhausted. Casca then puts on some clothing and says, it's pathetic, you're the only one I didn't want to be saved by. And this makes Guts realize that Casca really hates him. He then wonders why she joined the Band of the Hawk, and it's because of Griffith. Turns out her home village was poor and nestled in a mountain ravine. The land was barren and they couldn't grow much crops, besides oats. And because of the war efforts, they were bled dry by taxes, so people starved to death in the winter times. And because their village was near a border, it was often involved in skirmishes. And the only thing that the townspeople could do was go up into the mountains and hide silently. We were all used to being robbed and walked over. I too thought that such a way of life was just natural. And then one day, a nobleman ended up buying Casca from her family. And though he was reluctant, the father accepted the deal, given the fact that they had 6 children and they were rather poor. Now inside the carriage, Casca was attacked by the aristocrat, and it turned out that he wanted to rape her. He eventually caught her and pinned her down. I can't help it, it's natural. Those 2 ideas were always in my heart to help me stay connected to reality. But just then, Griffith came in, with sword in hand on top of a horse. Does being born of nobility mean that you're chosen by God? So strange. It was as if the image of some saint adorning the wall of the village church had just come to life. He was awe-inspiring, an otherworldly spectacle. I thought God had taken pity on this miserable, powerless girl and sent an angel. Now, trivia question, how old was Casca when Griffith saved her life? Pause the video if you don't want to be spoiled, otherwise the answer is 12. If you have something to protect, take up that sword, says Griffith. The nobleman dives for the sword, but Casca grabs it first. And with one swift move, she thrusts the sword through the aristocrat and kills him. However, being her first killed, she's rather troubled by the affair. Griffith then comes down and steadies her shaking hands. The fear didn't vanish completely, but the feelings of guilt and regret faded. His magnificence and the warmth of the blanket he gave me filled my heart. Now Griffith is ready to go with the Band of the Hawk, and Casca is wondering what she should do. Do as you wish, says Griffith. Let me come with you, screams Casca. Now Quirkus says they aren't just some thieves, they're collecting war funds so they can eventually set up an army. But Casca can't go back to her village, given the fact that she would be a burden on her family. You might die, you know, says Griffith. But despite the risk, Casca nods her head. Didn't I tell you, do as you wish. Whether you come along or not is your decision. You know how to fight already, don't you? But you were the one who gave me the sword and blanket, says Casca. Now we got a beautiful cover image here of Guts and Casca for volume 7 of Berserk, really nice stuff. And now we're officially on chapter 17, which is titled Casca chapter 3. Alright, so just a brief diversion here, guys. For the release of Berserk volume 7, Kentaro Miura released this note to the readers along with this original illustration of Casca. So it didn't come out when chapter 17 came out, so it came out on March 29th of 1994, which was a later date than chapter 17. But I thought it would be appropriate to put it here since it corresponds to volume 7. Now after Casca joined the Band of the Hawk, everything changed for her. What was once a paltry dining table by the fire became a glorious battlefield adjoined by death and blood. Since that day, the day I met Griffith, even now I feel it's been one long dream. Back then, I idolized Griffith. He was like some prophet or saint. And what's really interesting is that everyone in their band was a ragtag commoner, and leading them was a boy of innocence. He wasn't a noble, he wasn't a knight, he wasn't an aristocrat. He was a commoner like everyone else. A miracle. Yes, in my eyes, that's exactly what Griffith was. Now, eventually the Band of the Hawk became involved in a certain feudal lord's dispute. And the man that the Band of the Hawk was going to help was a man of sordid taste. And it turns out those tastes included small boys from neighboring villages. A heart-rending sense of fear and disgust. I had almost become like that once, says Casca. But just like that time, by putting his hand on my shoulder, just from that, I mysteriously stopped trembling. Now, after a few skirmishes, Griffith finds a dead boy on the battlefield. A boy that was only about 10 years old. Now, Pippin eventually finds one of his toys, which was a knight scuffed, dirtied, and missing a leg. He must have greatly admired knights, says Griffith. I remember him well. He gazed at me as if I were the hero of some story. I wonder if he was happy, dreaming. Did he die enchanted by his dream? Or was death the end of the dream? Was it despair? Maybe my dream is what killed this boy. Now later on, Casca's walking through the castle courtyards and notices Griffith high up in a chamber. Griffith! But then she noticed Lord Gennon come from behind Griffith, and Gennon took Griffith away to the bedroom, which shocked and confused Casca. Hey, you're kidding, right? You mean Mr. Ball of Pride? Now the next morning, Casca was walking along the river and noticed Griffith bathing himself. Why not join me? It feels nice, says Griffith. Am I dirty? Casca then wonders why he was alone with Gennon. Why would you with someone like him? Money, replies Griffith. An army consumes so much money just being. Men, horses, equipment, provisions, none of it's free. And the Band of the Hawk will grow larger and larger. It has to. For that too, we need a vast amount of war funds. Now they could have raised the war funds through their natural efforts, but Griffith wanted to expedite the process. With every battle fought, I lose more troops. Griffith, is it because of that boy? Replies Casca. No. I thought about it logically. To go to battle 10 times and lose hundreds of soldiers, or to seduce one old man, which is the lesser risk? But if for their sakes, for the sake of the dead, if there's something I can do, that thing is to win. Griffith then scratches his own skin with his nails. I'll keep winning to fulfill my dream, to which they cling. My dream can only be realized by building upon their corpses. It's a blood-smeared dream after all. But for hundreds of thousands of lives to hang in the balance, and myself alone not to be unclean, what I want won't enter my grasp so easily as that. Casca then runs over and grabs onto Griffith. Stop it! Just stop it! I'm alright. It's nothing. Casca tells Guts that the dream that Griffith is chasing is so genuine and extraordinary that the burden must be immeasurable. It's not that he's strong. Griffith has to make himself strong. I want to be by his side. If he's going to sacrifice everything for his dream, if his dream is to fight and cut away his own path, then I want to be his sword. Sometime later, Casca notices that she's become a veteran of warfare, and she even believes that Griffith's wish is going to come true someday. Until she meets Guts. Do you remember that day what Griffith said to you on top of that hill? I want you, says Griffith. Those words, he never says anything like that. You know I couldn't stand it. You got Griffith to say that so easily. I envied you. She then realizes that Griffith relies upon Guts. What I can't forgive is that selfishness of yours. The fact that you've almost gotten Griffith killed, screams Casca. I don't care if you get yourself killed on some battlefield, but I won't let you take Griffith's dream down with you. She then begins crying in Guts' chest as she wonders why Griffith put so much faith into Guts. Guts puts his head up, but then he notices a noise, and he realizes that there's some Tudor troops really close to their position. And it turns out that Sir Adon put a bounty on Guts and Casca's heads, dead or alive. Guts then gives Casca some medicine and says there's no time to waste. They gotta get moving as the sun sets. We then see the sun setting, and Guts and Casca are on the move. However, Casca falls to her knees, still tired from her ordeals. What the hell? Women are such royal pains. Guts then says, it doesn't matter to the enemy if you're a woman or whatever. They might actually like it, you know. Casca then musters up some strength, stands up, and says, let's go. And this puts a bit of a smile on Guts' face. However, they're stopped by an arrow, and they quickly realize that they're surrounded from all sides. So you're alive! Ha ha ha! Make me happy, boy! He then threatens to torture Guts when he captures him. As for the woman, she'll be a toy for my men here. Maybe you better rethink that one. She's a nightmare. She'll bite it right off, says Guts. Adon's men then attack, and Guts is right in the throes of action. And even Casca is doing her part to fight off the enemy soldiers. And as the two put their backs together, they realize they're in for a long night. Alright, so now we're on chapter 19, Prepared for Death, chapter 2. Now Adon is telling his troops not to falter, but Guts is just slicing and dicing them rather easily. He then gets attacked by multiple soldiers, but he leaps into the air, thrusts his sword into someone's throat, and just starts cutting everyone in sight. Casca also performs a nice maneuver by cutting someone's wrist, and while he's down, cutting another soldier right in the artery. Now Casca and Guts go back to back once again, but she's looking rather tired at the moment. And then Adon announces the next soldier, a hulking, monstrous man known as Samson. And it turns out that he's second in command for the Blue Whale Ultra Heavy Armored Fierce Assault Annihilation Corps. Samson, the brother of Adon. Little brother at that. And not only is he huge and strong, but his armor is 3 times thicker than ordinary plate. Now Samson lunges in, and it looks like it's going to be quite the fight. Now Samson uses his massive flail to toss it at Guts, but Guts manages to deflect it and hits another soldier with it. Samson then tries to hit Guts with a barrage of attacks. And the other soldiers are like, this is ridiculous. How is he stopping all of Samson's attacks? Now Casca is wondering why he's deflecting all the strikes instead of evading. She then realizes that Guts is wounded. Looks like the arrow wound you got protecting the woman hasn't quite healed yet, has it? Says Adon. Guts then says, I'll buy you a chance. Hightail it through the forest. Samson then uses his flail once more, but this time, Guts strikes it and cracks it right in half. He then lunges towards to stun Samson, and with that, Samson is dead and out of here, folks. Now, screams Guts. Don't stand there and stare, get moving. I can't just run off alone, replies Casca. Now Adon commands his men to shoot at the woman, but Guts decides to use his body as a shield. Now Casca is wondering why he's doing all this, but he's like, sick as you are, you're just in my way, so get lost. It's like you said before, maybe I'm satisfied just as long as I can swing my sword around. Go to your sword master. Go to Griffith. Alright, so now we're on chapter 20 of Berserk, Prepared for Death, chapter 3. And we see Guts slashing through many enemy soldiers right here. Don't just stand there! Go! Now! Screams Guts. I swear I'll come back with the others. Until then, don't die! Screams Casca. Now the others don't want to let Casca escape, but Guts smashes one of them right in the face. Now as he cuts through the armor of the men, they're wondering that he's cutting through them like they're ground cherries. And they're like, no one told us that there was someone like this that existed. And to top things off, Guts admits that his sword is dull and it's not cutting too well right now. Now Adon tries to reassure his men that even though he's very strong and formidable, he's only one man, they should be able to take him down. And that anyone who takes him down is guaranteed 5 times the normal bounty. And they'll be put in charge of 100 men. Now they all look to attack together, but Guts is ready to slash them all down. Now we see Casca running through the woods. Unfortunately, she trips on a root and falls down. She then notices that she's being chased by several soldiers. Now one of them jumps from a rock, but Casca is able to cut him down. She then realizes she's getting attacked by the rear, but turns around and kicks him right in the chin. We then go back to Guts as he's slashing down multiple soldiers. And goddamn does this look epic, guys. We see arms flying, blood splattering, and Guts is just in full-on rage mode right now. He then takes his first damage by blocking an arrow with one of his hands. But instead of feeling like he's defeated, he's like, this kind of evens the playing field. Things are getting interesting now. Now Casca takes out another soldier. Unfortunately, she's surrounded and she gets pinned down to the ground. But before they kill her, they want to have a little bit of fun first. Casca begins to panic and starts to feel that she's so powerless right now. And then she begins to think of Guts, and he says, here, this worthless place, is this where it ends for you? Go back, go to your sword master. And then she says, you know what, I'm not gonna bite my tongue right now. However, I won't let you have your way with me either. She then takes a sharp stick and jabs it right in the guy's eye. And then as she stands up, she notices a bunch of arrows that go into the enemy soldiers. And as she turns around, she notices the Band of the Hawk with Judo leading the way. That's about far enough. She's the only woman for us. She won't come cheap. Alright, so chapter 21 now, Survival. Now this is just an absolutely gorgeous manga panel right here. We got a bunch of blood on Guts, cuts everywhere. He's looking at all the soldiers, and Adon is like, impossible! With one arm, he's killed half of 100 men. That's just a fluke. And then he's like, don't falter. He can barely stand now. Fall upon him all at once. And then as Guts is fighting the multitude of soldiers, he begins to ponder to himself, what the hell am I doing? In this dumb place, risking my life so cheaply. Is it for her? No, probably not. Right now, no time to think. All there is now is how to cut, how to kill, that's all. Even these thoughts will slip my mind in time, and then only the beat of my heart still remains. Now, Judo tells Casca that it was hard to convince the powers to be that they could go save their lives. However, Casca has no time to rest. She's like, hurry, we gotta save Guts. And with no time to waste, the Band of the Hawk starts to run through the woods as Casca leads the way. Be in time, please be in time. And then we see Casca and the others return to the battlefield. Day is breaking, and there's a bunch of dead bodies lying down. And amongst all the wreckage, Casca begins to panic, but then she sees Guts leaning up against a tree. And he's got blood coming from multiple parts of his body, he's got his eyes closed, so it's not really certain whether or not he's dead or alive at this point. Casca runs over, begins to shake him, and he's like, don't shake me. You'll just make the wounds worse. And with that, the Band of the Hawk, including Casca, have a smile on their face. We then see Guts on a stretcher as they're taking him back to the Band of the Hawk. Now, Guts wants to walk right away, but Casca's like, hey, don't move. And even as the medical doctor is trying to treat him, Guts is fighting back. He's like, hey, be careful there. Which I kind of find really funny because even though he fought 100 men, he's bleeding from multiple parts of his body, he's tired and weary, he's still got the energy to fight back against the doctor here. And even though the doctor wants him to get some rest, Guts wants to fight till the end of the campaign, even if he has to crawl. We then find out from Pippin that Griffith's attending a war council at headquarters. In fact, he left this morning, and he won't be back until tomorrow. Now, Judo asks Casca if she needs to be treated, but she's like, no, I'm fine, mine's is not an injury. We then see it's nighttime as the Band of the Hawk is having a good time around the fire. Casca then thinks about the words that Guts said in the woods. Go back, go to your swordmaster, go to Griffith. Now, Judo pulls Casca aside and says that the nobles that surrounded Griffith strongly opposed his decision to send out a search party for Guts and Casca. But Griffith said, those two are vital to the Band of the Hawk, I will not lose them. And just hearing how pivotal Casca is to the Band of the Hawk brings a tear to her eye. Now, Judo tossed Casca some medicine and explains that he got it from an elf in a traveling entertainment troupe that he used to work for years ago. And even though it seems preposterous, elf dust does exist. Casca then takes the elf dust and sees Guts sitting up on a hill by a giant tree. And now we're on chapter 22, Campfire of Dreams. Casca then walks up to Guts and she's like, is this okay? You're not resting. I feel too hot to sleep. This was the coolest place, says Guts. And without warning, Casca begins applying the elf dust to Guts. Now, Guts explains that the reason that he fought the 100 men is not really for her sake, but something that he did for himself. Running away really isn't his style. He also had to score to settle with the Don as well. He then states that fighting 100 men doesn't really matter, because he's not really fighting for anything in his life, not like Griffith and Casca. In fact, what Griffith has bet his entire life on is actually kind of amazing. He then explains that his second in command, Gaston, isn't really into fighting, and that he plans on opening a clothing store in the downtown Windham area. He then explains that each one of the lights in the campfire is like a little dream, a little hope. A campfire of dreams, as it were. And it's as if everyone has brought their individual flames here. And together, they create the blazing inferno named Griffith. But my flame ain't here, says Guts. As for me, maybe I'm just warming myself by that campfire for a bit. Maybe I just stopped in by chance. Guts then raises his sword to the sky and says, as long as I have this, I'm confident I can survive any battle. That's how it's been up till now. Even before I joined the Band of the Hawk, no matter how badly the battle was lost, I myself was sure to survive. Like this time. The mercenary who raised him only taught him how to wield the sword. I don't want to die, but just because I don't want to die, just because I didn't know more than how to use this, I kept fighting in battles. And maybe, more than anything, I've always tried to leave the most essential reason for fighting up to other people. Guts then stands up and wonders why he told Casca all that. After hearing the speech, Casca begins to realize something. Don't tell me you're leaving the Hawks. Guts then confirms that he's fighting to the end of the campaign, but doesn't give any assurances for the future. Griffith then returns to camp as everyone goes to greet him. Now, Casca immediately apologizes for pushing herself, but Guts slaps her on the butt as she jumps into Griffith's arms. What was that for, jerk? Welcome back, says Griffith. Now Guts goes off with his men as Casca begins to wonder if he was actually serious about what he was talking about. We then transition to the Tudor army stronghold of Doldrey Castle. Now the White Tiger Knights of Midland are not having a good time at Doldrey Castle, and they're wondering why this is. And it turns out it's because of Tudor's most powerful knights, the Holy Purple Rhino Knights. Alright, so now we're on chapter 23 of Berserk, the Battle for Doldrey, chapter 1. Now it turns out that the Midland army has been battling with Tudor over 100 years. Much like the 100 Years' War between England and France. It turns out that the fortress of Doldrey originally belonged to the Midland army. However, in the 100 Years' War, it has since fallen to the Tudor hands. And ironically enough, it's become the most important base in their operations. Now luckily for the Midland army, Tudor is undergoing an internal conflict for the succession to the throne, which means that they won't be at full power during their next battle. Despite the golden opportunity, however, Doldrey is impenetrable, and to take it down, they're going to have to take down the valiant General Bascan of the Holy Purple Rhino Knights. Now because Midland's mightiest army, the White Tiger Knights, didn't have any success in doing their mission, it seems like it's all in vain at this point. Now one of the generals looks over at Griffith and he's like, "How about you, Sir Griffith?" And he responds by saying, "If I were so ordered." And the other generals are astonished to hear this, and even the king looks a little bit surprised. "If His Majesty so ordered me," says Griffith. Now the general for the White Tiger Knights is like, "This is nonsense. You don't know anything. anything. Now, some of the generals think that the fact that Griffith never lost a battle has made him a bit delusional, but the king is like, was that sincere? And he simply nods his head. Now, the other generals try to convince the king that it can't be done, but Griffith says, there is no need for a large force. I will require only the Band of the Hawk. Now, the Band of the Hawk only constitutes 5,000 cavalry, and they would be going up against an occupying force of 30,000, which makes the task seem insurmountable. Now, even though the others are dismissive of Griffith, Laban is like, hey, well, why don't we just give it a chance? And even if this clever plan doesn't work, it won't have a significant impact on the morale of the entire army. Now, the other generals want to hear the king's decision, and he's like, I command the Band of the Hawk to capture Doldrey. Now, after the meeting, Owen goes up to Laban, and he's like, you really bought into this whole Griffith and the Band of the Hawk? And he's like, well, if he can't do it, I doubt anyone in Midland can. Now, Griffith gets their attention, and they're a little bit awestruck right here. And Laban even says, we might be fighting alongside the hero of the century. Meanwhile, we see Guts and the Hawk Raiders playing a game of Cho Bakuchi. It turns out that 2 dice are rolled, and if the total comes up to odd, it's Han, and if it's even, it's Cho. Now, Casca looks a little bit worried right now, but Guts tries to reassure her and says, we've done this millions of times, I'm sure the odds are in our favor. And she's like, I just hope he stays calm and composed. She then informs Guts that the man that spent the night with Griffith is now the commander of the Tudor Empire's northern battlefront. We then see Adon returning to Doldrey Castle, and he's immediately excoriated by Bascan of the Holy Purple Rhino Knights. Not only have you suffered the disgrace of leading an entire mercenary troop to their deaths for the sake of settling a grudge, but your younger brother Samson lost his life, and you dare to return alone in dishonor. He then takes a battle axe and literally puts it right in Adon's face, narrowly hitting him, and putting the fear of God in him. He then revokes all command authority given to Adon for the remainder of the war. He then returns to Genin, who states that he's severe as always. They then talk about the fact that the Band of the Hawk is coming to Doldrey Castle. And it actually seems like Bascan is rather pleased by this because the Band of the Hawk has never been defeated. And this is going to be a great challenge for him. However, Genin gives him a warning to capture Griffith, the leader of the Band of the Hawk, alive. Am I clear? It's your governor's command. Alright, so chapter 24, The Battle for Doldrey, chapter 2. Now this chapter originally came out on October 22nd of 1993, and it came out in Young Animal issue number 21, and it had this picture of Guts on the cover, and this is a really badass looking cover here on Young Animal. I absolutely love this. Now Judo comes up to Guts and he's like, hey, how are your injuries? And Guts is like, yeah, they're just about closed up. It's actually bewildered the doctor. Now it turns out that the walls for Doldrey are 2 times higher and thicker than most. And to top it off, it's guarded by the Holy Purple Rhino Knights. Now, General Bascan steps forward, and he's like, what the heck is Griffith doing here? The Band of the Hawk is placing their backs to the river. There's nowhere to run. He then begins to wonder why Genin has so much interest in Griffith. But he's like, yeah, that's not really my business right now. My only concern is to defeat the enemy. Genin then begins to remember Griffith, and he's like, oh, that one night. I can't forget it. The burns of that night still do not heal. I swear I will have you once more, lover. And goddamn if that's not creepy, guys. Now, Guts notices a gust storm, but Griffith comes up and says, it's all part of the plan. Guts then indicates that he's ready for battle as he remembers Casca's words. He then stares up at the Band of the Hawk flag and says, this is the end. It's probably the last time I swing my sword beneath this banner. But I'll keep it together. I go into battle as the captain of the Hawk's Raiders, nothing else. And with this, Griffith yells, Vanguard, charge! And the battle is on, folks. Now, General Bascan notices that Griffith has divided his forces, and he doesn't want to waste any time in destroying the enemy. We then see Guts enter the fray by slicing one of the Holy Purple Rhino Knights right across the abdomen. And goddamn is this next panel epic, guys. I mean, holy cow. I mean, just look at the horses, look at Guts, look at the swords. I mean, this is just absolutely gorgeous. What I would give to have this mounted on my wall. I mean, this is just so beautiful. We then see Guts confronting Bascan head on, yet unfortunately, Bascan knocks off Guts' helmet. Guts was also able to cut off some of the spikes from Bascan's armor. And with this, we're on chapter 25, The Battle for Doldrey, chapter 3. Now this is the first time in the history of the Purple Rhino Knights that they're actually being pushed back. However, Bascan tells his men not to falter and to charge forward and push him back. Now Genin notices that the Hawks and the Rhinos are well matched, however, the Hawks' troops are still limited in numbers. He does worry that Bascan might kill Griffith in the throes of battle, and because of this fear, he decides that he wants to go to the battlefield himself. And by making this decision, the defense for the fortress is severely limited. Griffith then gives the orders to withdraw and head back to headquarters. We then see all the members of the Band of the Hawk turn around and go away from the castle. Now Genin enters the battlefield and says, "The enemy is in flight. Would you let your chance at victory slip away?" Now Baskan starts to have misgivings about pursuing them. However, Genin takes charge and says anyone that captures Griffith alive is going to be given a special double promotion and whatever monetary reward that they wish. He then takes direct command and says that the Holy Purple Rhino Knight will pursue the enemy. Guts then notices that the enemy has taken the bait and that they're playing into Griffith's hand. Griffith then orders his men into formation and says it's do or die. The river's behind. We have no escape route. Lay down your lives. There's no other chance for survival. But if we do survive, we will stand victorious. And in the next panel here, we got a picture of Guts as he's getting ready for battle. And goddamn, does this look stunning, guys. And this next panel is fantastic as well, as you got all the members of the Band of the Hawk as they're all charging forward into battle. And then off on the cliffs, away from the battlefield, we see a lone soldier, and it turns out to be Casca. And it turns out that she's heading up a covert operation. We then see that there's hardly any soldiers within the castle walls of Doldrey, as Casca and her group look ready to invade it. "Rush in!" commands Casca. "First Division, block the gates. Absolutely no enemy messengers get outside. All others proceed according to plan." We then see Adon, who is relieved of his command, watching Casca from a window high up in Doldrey, and he doesn't look too happy about this. Alright, so chapter 26, Battle for Doldrey, chapter 4. And to start off this chapter, we see Adon, and it says, "Shock Adon." Now, if you notice something about Adon's armor here, the knees, shoulders, and helmet look like a shark. You can see the razor-sharp teeth, the fin, the eyes, everything about it looks like a shark. And according to Puella from SkullKnight.com, the correct translation for this page is not Shock-Adon, it's Shark-Adon, hence the reason that he's wearing the shark armor. So that seems to make a little more sense, but either way, it really doesn't make much of a difference. Casca then calls him a cockroach, and he's like, I also go by Invincible Baron Adon. He then claims that he saw through their schemes and took it upon himself to defend the fortress. We then see the various troops of Doldrey Castle surround the Band of the Hawk. And Adon says, "Listen, not one of them must be allowed to leave here alive. Get them!" And with the rest of the Band of the Hawk busy, Adon decides to focus his attention on Casca and get revenge for his younger brother, Samson. We then go back outside the castle and we see the battle between the Band of the Hawk and the Purple Rhino Knights. And everyone's doing their part, Pippin, Judo, Corcus, and Griffith. Now Genin is getting impatient. He's like, why haven't they captured Griffith yet? We then see Guts slashing through numerous soldiers. And the Purple Rhino Knights are like, what strength? Can anyone stop him? And that's when General Baskan steps forward. And he decides to take Guts on full force. Now Guts is able to knock off one of his spikes on his shoulder, so he's showing great resolve right here. And as they go back and forth, the other soldiers are like, this is amazing, we can't even see their weapons at this point. We then go back to Doldrey Castle as we see Casca seize the advantage in her battle with Adon. She then admits that in her last battle that she wasn't in top form, but now she's back to normal again. And Adon's actually pretty blunt about it. He's like, what? Are you telling me you were on your period? Casca then commands the troops to cut through the enemy soldiers. We then see Pippin defend Rickert by taking down one of the enemy soldiers. Now Corcus says that it's only a matter of time before they're wiped out, but Rickert is like, we gotta keep fighting, there's no escape for us. We then see Griffith look over at Guts' battle as he's bloody, weary, and tired. And Guts is like, he's strong. I feel more dead than alive. Even worse than fighting those 100 mercs. If I don't put my life on the line, I'm a dead man. However, he does note that it's not as bad as the time that he fought Nosferatu Zod. And because of this, it gives him the confidence to charge forward. We then see Casca take down Adon as he begs for forgiveness. Yet he's only using this pathetic groveling to shoot Casca with a crossbow. He then claims it's a secret advanced archery technique passed down through the Korbowitz family. And it roughly translates into Furious Attack, Thunderclap, Burst. Yeah, Casca's like, I've got no time to listen to you laugh any longer. Alright, so now we're on chapter 27, The Battle for Doldrey, chapter 5. And this is the first chapter of volume 8 of Berserk, so we got this really nice cover page here of Guts and Griffith. Really beautiful cover. Now, like the volume 7 note, we also have a note for volume 8 as well, along with an original illustration of Guts. Now, officially, this came out on September 29th of 1994. Now, to start off this chapter, we see a part of a sword flinging through the air, and it happens to be Guts' sword. It was chipped in half. Now, the Band of the Hawk is genuinely shocked by this, especially Griffith, as Guts is like, I'm screwed. And he's like, my sword was messed up from fighting those 100 men. I was careless. Damn it. What now? And then off on the mountainside, we see a man sitting on a horse, and it's none other than Nosferatu Zod. Now inside the castle walls, Adon is twirling his spear on his hand. And he gives Casca an alternative. He's like, hey, if you don't want to fight, you could just lay down to me now, and I can use you for my personal toy. He then uses his spear to knock off Casca's helmet. Now, as she's dodging the multitude of attacks, she's like, trouble. If I move around, the drug. She eventually gets backed into a corner. Now, Adon is starting to feel himself here, but Casca drives her sword into the ground, uses it to elevate herself into the air, and with one swift motion, she's able to cut Adon down. And she's like, all right, the rest are little fish. Rout them. Now, realizing that Guts is finished, Bascan decides to charge forward. Now, the Band of the Hawk looks to intercept him. However, he becomes enraged and just forces his way through by cutting them all in half. Now, Guts looks very worried right now as we see Zod flexing his arm as he chucks the sword down at him. Guts then notices the massive sword as Griffith is like, Guts, take up that sword! Guts immediately does so and uses it to defend himself. He then goes on the offensive and slices off Bascan's head along with his horse's head as well. Now, even though the general is down, Genin tries to remind his forces that the battle is not over yet. However, one of the soldiers is like, Ugh, Governor, look! And then we see that the Tudor army has lost control over Doldrey, and it now belongs in the hands of the Band of the Hawk. Alright, so now we're on chapter 28, the Battle for Doldrey, chapter 6. Now, Casca looks very pleased that they were able to accomplish their mission. Now, the Tudor army is confused as to how this could have happened. And Guts is like, your leader's dead. It's plain as day, the fortress has fallen. It means you all lost. And then Griffith raises his sword into the air and he's like, cry out, cry for victory. And he instructs his troops to hunt down the remnants of the Tudor army. However, if they decide to flee, particularly if they put up resistance. And because of the impending doom, the Tudor army decides to flee from the area. Now, Genin is trying to rally the troops, but unfortunately for him, no one seems to be listening. He's then thrown from his horse as Griffith looks down on him. Now, Genin tries to resolve their differences, and he's like, I've been searching for you ever since that day. And he's been waiting eagerly for this day to come. For the day in which Griffith returns to him. And he even points out that he told his men not to kill him in the throes of battle. And he's like, you don't resent me, do you? And Griffith's like, no, I don't resent you. I simply have no emotional interest in you at all. Resentment, endearment, nothing. I just took the liberty of using you when the opportunity appeared. You were like a stone lying by the side of the path I walk. That and nothing more. Now, Genin is enraged by this, but Griffith decides to thrust his sword right through his eye. And with this, he returns to the Band of the Hawk. Now, we see that Casca is still recovering from the poison that she was injected with by Adon earlier. Now, Guts walks up to her with sword in hand, looking like a total Chad, and he's like, yo, tough day. He then helps her up and shows her the site of the battlefield, the site of the victorious Hawk, the site of the heroic Griffith. And this is a really sad moment for Casca because although she's happy for Griffith achieving his dreams, it feels like he exists somewhere far away, that he will no longer be the Griffith that they once knew. And even Guts looks over at Griffith here and you can see a lot of deep contemplation on his part. And in a chivalrous moment, Guts lifts up Casca, and he's like, let's go to meet your leader. And we see a very interesting moment here in which Casca's looking up at Guts, and she looks a little bit embarrassed, almost a little bit smitten, if you will. Now, Guts looks over at the sword, and he's like, couldn't be. And with this, we're transported to the mountaintop in which Zod sits. And goddamn, look at the detail on this image, guys. I mean, the arm, the face, the horse, just everything about it is just absolutely gorgeous here. And then Zod's got another prophecy. He's like, the eclipse will soon come, and the demon Advent approaches as he rides off into the sunset. Alright, so now we're on chapter 29 of Berserk, Triumphant Return. And we got another beautiful colored panel right here of Guts and Casca. Now, this issue originally came out on January 28th of 1994. And it came out in Young Animal issue number 3, and this was the intro cover for that magazine. So, really cool stuff. Now, to start off this chapter, we see 6 cloaked figures that are talking about Griffith's rise to power. However, they're not speaking glowingly of Griffith. They're actually rather annoyed by him. And the fact that his popularity has risen among the people, and even the king, is becoming quite troublesome. And according to inside information, Griffith will be granted the position of general. Now, we see that Minister Foss is a part of this meeting, and he proposes that they assassinate Griffith via poison. Now, trivia question, what kind of poison does Foss want to use to poison Griffith with? Now, the answer is anti-Aries. Now, according to Wikipedia, what makes it so toxic is due to a cardiac glycoside named anti-Aryan. It is used as is a toxin for arrows, darts, and blow darts, particularly in island Southeast Asian cultures. Now in China, this plant is known as arrow poisonwood, and the poison is said to be so deadly that it has been described as 7 up, 8 down, 9 death, meaning that a victim can take no more than 7 steps uphill, 8 steps downhill, or 9 steps on level ground before dying. And it's said to come from the most poisonous tree in the world, and it is said that no one can reach the trunk of the tree without dying themselves. So pretty ruthless stuff here on Foss's part. It makes you wonder how they collected the toxin in the first place, but that's a story for another day. Now some of the others are worried that they might be implicated in the matter, but the Queen of Midland then steps forward. And she's going to make sure that Griffith's assassination goes off without a hitch, and that none of them are implicated. She then states, "I am not about to allow the long and glorious history of Midland's rule to be trampled upon by this lowly commoner from who knows where." Now it's kind of interesting here because based on Foss's internal dialogue, he's aware of the affair between the Queen and General Julius. An affair that's unbeknownst to the King of Midland. And because of this, Foss used this information to plant the idea in the Queen's mind that Griffith was the one behind Julius's death, which actually turns out to be the case. Now the Queen of Midland talks about the fact that the king had to spend all his time ruling the kingdom, and he didn't really have any time for his family. But she postulates that because the former queen died, and she was the only woman that he truly loved, that this was just an excuse. Now to console herself, she would give herself to Julius, not based on love, but because the kingdom itself was too cold for her. She was a lone woman in an unknown foreign land. But now that Julius is gone, she realizes that it was in fact love, and that she needed him more than she realized. "I will never forgive you, Griffith, not as the Queen of Midland, but as a woman, I will take my revenge." It is now time for the celebratory parade as the Band of the Hawk returns to Windham in victorious fashion. And of course we got one of the greatest moments in the manga here, the moment in which Corcus dabs to the crowd. Now Judo, Rickert, and Pippin all seem to be enjoying themselves, but Casca feels a little bit awkward about the situation. We then see that Guts is just riding stoically through the crowd, and he's marveling at the fact that all of this is happening because of one man's dream. We then see Princess Charlotte attempting to get Griffith's attention, but he doesn't seem to notice. Now behind the scenes, the Queen of Midland and the other aristocrats are talking about a banquet that's going to be held for the Band of the Hawk. A banquet in which they want to enact their plan. Now Foss looks rather pleased with himself here, but one of his attendants brings him a letter. A letter that absolutely shocks him. Now he tries to play it off calmly here, but as he leaves, he's like, "Why? How? How did this happen? You bastard! You bastard!" And before we find out the answer to this conundrum, we see Griffith riding through the streets in a very stoic and heroic manner.